That's all I had to do.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
Now I should look at you.
no, it doesn't matter. Well, yeah, you can just look at me. You don't have to look at anything else. But I just wanted to ask you some questions that, the letter that you wrote to all of us about you and your life growing up and all of that, and then the one you just wrote about Dad and stuff. And I was just going to maybe ask you some questions about some other stuff that there's not as much in the letters about.
Oh,
We can talk
okay.
about it a little bit. So I was going to ask you about, what was your favorite thing to do when you were growing up? I mean, I know there was a lot of hard stuff and it was really difficult and everything, but were there things that, what did you like to do most? What did you enjoy the most?
When I was small, I loved to go to my grandparents' house and visit because they had a big, lovely farmhouse, and there was big yard and lots of things to, animals and things like that, and things to do, and I loved to go there and visit. And as for recreation, we didn't do much because in those days there was not much to do. We didn't go to shows or anything like that. If there was anything going on at school, we did do that. But as far as recreation, then later on in life, I did have a bicycle, and I loved to ride my bicycle. But as far as recreation, and of course, my greatest thing I loved to do was read. The older I got, the more I read. And when I got old enough that I should be working and helping my mother, she always said that I loved to read so much that I could sit down in a room that was dusty and needed to have a lot of things done, and it would not bother me one bit, and I'd just sit there and read because I love to read.
I think everybody says that to someone at some point in time. It's sort of like, can't you see what needs to be done? No, I'm doing something I want to. Did you like sports? Like you do
Yes,
now?
I love sports, you mean like in later years? Yes, I love sports. Sports was really one of my favorite things. I was a cheerleader when I was in high school, and I loved basketball. Basketball was my favorite, and I guess because I was a cheerleader. Of course, we didn't have football in those days, or soccer. Baseball and basketball was about all you had then. But I was a cheerleader, and I loved basketball, and I loved cheerleading, and I loved to watch anything to do with. We didn't have anything like a relay team or anything like that. But I did like to run, and when we were playing games, that was one of the things I liked to do. I was a pretty good runner. I was a pretty good cheerleader, I guess, because I liked it. Mm-hmm. I loved that part of it, and I loved to go to all of the basketball games. I guess I sort of lived for that. And then my interest after I graduated from high school, my interest changed to dancing. I love to dance, and when I guess this wasn't after. This was while I was in high school. At the YWCA, they had every Friday night they would have a dance for young people, and you didn't have to have a date. You could, so it would be a bunch of us girls that would go, and then of course there would be fellows that would be there that we could dance with. But my heart would be broken if I didn't get to go on Friday night, because that was a big highlight that I enjoyed, because I love to dance, and that was one of my disappointments in my married life, was because Neff did not care to dance, and so I had to give that up because that really was one of the things that I liked to do when I was younger.
How much difference is there between you and Betty?
6 years.
6 years. So you were never sort of a part of the same crowd or anything?
No.
She was always a
No.
lot younger?
No, there was 6 years difference between us. And, of course, we're very different in nature and don't enjoy a lot of things, although, of course, the reading part, she loved to read just as much, more so probably than I did.
And after you graduated, you went to business college?
After I graduated from high school, when I was in high school, sometime during my high school years, and I forget what year I was in, must have been like junior or senior year. Must have been my junior year. We lived with my mother in Muncie, and she tried to make ends meet by working she worked in a lunchroom at Ball stores, and of course didn't make very much money. She didn't have any education for a good job, which she hated because she was a good student and she would have liked to have gone on to college, but her folks at that time thought that girls never went to college. And so that, I think, was one reason why she got married as soon as she got out of school, because she was pretty unhappy about that part. But anyway, she got real sick and had a very bad operation, and they didn't think that she was going to live. It was some sort, I can't remember for sure what the operation was, except that the thing I remember the most was that peritonitis set in, and so she had poison all over her body, and they didn't think she would live. And of course, at that time, we had to go, before she got sick and got in the hospital, we had to go, Betty and I both had to go stay with our grandparents because there was no place else for us to stay. And I had a boyfriend who had a car, and so that was the only way that usually that I would get to see her very often. He would take me over once a week, and then of course my grandparents would go once a week so that Betty and we all could go. But he had a farm, and he farmed, and so we couldn't, he couldn't get away to go to any more often than that. And it took her quite a while to regain her strength and everything, and to be able to get back to work. And so when she finally was able to get back to work, and I graduated from Governor I.P. Gray School, which is between Red Key and Portland. Now, it's a little country consolidated school where you have all grades in the same school. And I think there was maybe 12 or 13 in our graduating class. And I graduated from there, and then I went to live with my mother, and this was during the Depression. And she did have a little bit of money in the bank, but the banks were so run on, people wanting to get their money out, that they would only let you have a certain amount, and it had to be for a certain reason. So I wanted to be, and I thought I wanted to be I either wanted to be a nurse or work in an office. Those were my two things. So I had to take the lesser of the two things. So I was they were able to grant me enough money to go to business college, and I could just draw out enough to make the payments. And it was supposed to have been a 9-month course. But it ended up that we didn't have that much money, so it ended up that I just did the 6-month course, and I didn't get to take the bookkeeping part. And but I did take 6 months, and then I got a job with a company there in Muncie. But it was a company that where you had to, I don't know whether they have them anymore or not, where you had to use a dictaphone, which meant that you put these things in your ears, and someone dictates on a disc, and you put these things in your ears, and then you type what they are saying, which is a letter that they are writing to someone. Well, that made me very, very nervous, and so I only worked there a week because I felt like I was a detriment to them, because it made me so nervous and upset that I didn't think I could do that. So then I looked for another job. I quit and looked for another job, and that was when I found this job at Newcastle with the Indiana Railroad as an office worker, and I sold tickets to people that were riding the interurban, and I did all of their billing, which was on like a typewriter, and it was called a billing machine, but it was very much like a typewriter, and I did whatever office work they had. And as I hadn't had bookkeeping before, why, although I don't think it really helps you to have bookkeeping, to take bookkeeping at a college, because every company has a different system. So you have to learn their own system. And so I worked there, and that was the way that Neff and I met.
Did you like each other when you first met?
Very much so, and he worked for, he had to quit school when he was a sophomore in high school, because his parents were very poor too. And we both came from a poor background as far as now my grandparents had money, but they didn't share it much, and so, because they didn't like my father. And so we were both from a poor background, and as far as being able to have anything extra to do with. And so he had to go to work when he was a sophomore in high school, and his dad he was a railroadman, or he was a motorman, he was the conductor. And so Neff had a lot of, he had been exposed to trains and everything. So he was able to get this job at the Indiana Railroad station, which was just like the station I was working at in Newcastle, only his was in Bluffton. And he did practically the same thing, except that he had added duties. Because they only had one person, it was a small place. Well, he was the ticket clerk, and did the work, and then he was also the baggage clerk, and he would put all the baggage on the cars and everything. So he did all of the work, and he had a very, very hard job. He worked like 10 hours a day, and he didn't have a day off. He worked 7 days a week, and he only made $70 for that, for working 70 hours a week. And then, but he was a good, very, very good worker. And then he, by that time, some of his other brothers and sisters were able to help too. And so he then was offered a job in Muncie, Indiana, at the same position. So he came to Muncie doing the same job. So he was
Were you still working in Newcastle?
I was working in Newcastle.
How far is that?
That's about maybe, I'm not sure. I'll just.
Would you like to take the train to work or the bus to work?
I took the interurban. See, that was part of my job. That was part of my pay. It was like, say, wasn't 50 miles. It was under 50 miles, I'll say. And but you see, if you worked for the interurban, well, you got a pass, so you could ride any place that the interurban went for nothing. So consequently, I could live in Muncie, and I could ride to Newcastle for nothing and work. It just made longer hours because I had to,
Where did the interurban run? Was that all over Indiana?
It ran from yes, but there was different divisions. Now there was like the division up around Fort Wayne and all, and that way, and Wabash, which was where Neff's father worked in the first place, because they lived in Wabash and Marion and that part of they lived up that way when he worked on there. But it also ran, the part that Neff worked and all, that ran from like Fort Wayne through Muncie to Indianapolis.
Did it go to different states at all?
And then, no. And then it went to Louisville, Kentucky. And that was as far as it went. And because I got one time while I was working, I got a pass and went to Louisville by myself just to just because I could go, you know, and see things. But that was the way that he and I met, because he worked at nighttime, and he was the baggage clerk. And so when I would come in from work, why, he would always be on duty. And that was the way that he and I met, because he would always be there when I would get off. And so we struck up a conversation, of course, and talked quite a bit, and it was a mutual admiration right from the beginning. We liked each other very much.
Was he living in Muncie then?
This was in Muncie, Indiana. Because he had a room with just a room by himself with a family. That was as much as he could afford. In the meantime, my mother had a house, and by that time, as soon as I had started working, and she was working, why, then we rented a larger house, and so we could take in roomers to make money. And so then we were able to bring Betty from my grandparents' house back to live with us, so that we could all be a family again. Because I was working and Mother was working, and then taking in roomers made us money, you know. So we had to double up an awful lot. Like Betty would sleep with my mother, and I would just sleep on a davenport, so that we would have extra space to rent.
Did you have permanent roomers or people that just would stay for a little bit?
We had permanent roomers, people that usually stayed for quite a while. And and that way Betty was able to, that was how Betty got to go to Muncie Central High School and graduate from there, which was a wonderful school for her to graduate from, because it was much more of an advantage for her, because that was from a little tiny country school that she had gone to a large, then it was a very large school and a very good school, and she was able to graduate from there. And I'm sure that helped her education. And of course she was very definite in everything she did. She did not enjoy, she was not a social person, and she sort of kept to herself a lot. And that was why I think she was such a brilliant person, because she studied so very hard and worked so very hard, and that was her life, that she did that. And she, of course, had made up her mind while she was going to Muncie Central, and since we lived in Muncie, that she wanted to go to college. And so she could go, and besides that, my mother had a pretty good job then at a place called Gay Games, and it's a place where you make tip books. They don't have those anymore, I think, but they used to sell them in bars where you have tickets that like I pay $1 for a ticket, and they pull it off and give it to you, and then it's like a raffle. And that was what this was. Of course, Mother was a shipping clerk, and when she worked there, and so she was doing the shipping part. But you could also do piecework at home. So that was what all three of us did at home. We all three made tip books at home at night, and you got so much for each tip book that you made. Well, Betty was very, very fast at it. She was much faster than either one of us. So she made pretty good money at that, and of course saved it all. And so as far as she didn't ever go with anyone much at all, because she worked so hard. But Neff and I were going with each other.
And what'd you guys do?
We didn't do anything because we couldn't afford to. We just take walks, and besides, you see, he worked at night. So what happened was that I would usually go, when I got in from work, I'd go down, his room wasn't too far from where that was. So I would go down to where his room was, and by the time I knew the people there, by the time I would get down to his room, he would be up getting ready to go to work. And then we would just walk back to the interurban station, and he would go to work, and then I would go on home. So as far as entertainment or any place to go, we didn't have the money, and so we didn't do anything, only just walk places. Of course, none of us had a car. So we all, you had to walk every place you went. And,
When did you decide to get married?
let's see, then Betty decided to go to Ball State College for 2 years, and then her ambition was to go to Ohio State University because she wanted to take accounting and advertising. And even though that was out of state and would cost more, she was a very determined person, and that was what she wanted to do. And she felt like if she could go to Ball State University for 2 years, she could get her basic there and live at home, and it wouldn't. And she could go ahead and work at piecework at Gay Games and make money, and then she would be able to save money, and hopefully then she would be able to get a job to help her when she got there. But she had planned that she absolutely was going to do that, and that's why she was very, very determined. And so that was, she was so determined that she wrote to our dad and told him that she wanted to go to college, and she was going to need so much money. I forget now, it seems to me like it might have been like $25 a month, that she absolutely had to have that much money in order to go to school for the last 2 years. And she went, she worked for a doctor's office, for a doctor's family in Columbus, Ohio, which is where Ohio State University is, and she was their maid, and they had 3 children, and so she did everything for them, babysat, cooked, cleaned the house, did everything that there was to do constantly while she's going to college. And they gave her her room and board and her street fare from where they lived to the college, and no money, just for that. But she did have her living place. And let's see, it's sort of hard for me to remember. Neff and I got married July the 21st, 1938. It's hard for me to remember now. I'm not sure just where, let's see, I'm not sure just whether Betty was through school or not.
Did you know for very long before that you were going to get married?
Oh, yes, we knew. Oh, yes. We knew for, I would say, 2 years that we were going to get married because we saved our money. And before we got married, we had bought practically all of our furniture. And there was a room that at the railroad station that they let us use for storage. And we had bought nearly all of our furniture and paid for it before we ever got married. And in the meantime, your dad also decided that he wanted to be more than just a ticket clerk. He wanted to be an operator. And so that meant that he was going to have to go to Richmond and work on coal cars and learn the business up like you learn any business, and do like an apprentice job for so long a time before he would be able to be a motorman and drive the high-speed cars. And he did that.
After you were married, or when you were?
He did that before we were married, and then came back and was able to get on what they call the extra board, which meant that he did not have a regular run, and the only time he would work would be when somebody was sick or was laid off. So times were pretty lean then. Sometimes maybe he'd go for a week and only work 1 or 2 days. And but we went ahead and got married, and because I was working, and Betty and Mother were making it all right because she was at Ball State when we got married. She was going to Ball State. They were making it all right because she was going to Ball State and Mother was working, and so they were making it okay. So we didn't live too far apart because we were able to walk to see each other all the time. And of course, you had to walk every place you went, even if it was quite a ways because you didn't have a car. And but as I say, when Neff and I got married, we pretty much had all of our furniture bought and paid for, or a lot of it, because you didn't use any money much for, you didn't go any place or have much pleasure because you couldn't afford to.
Mm-hmm.
You did things at home like you'd play cards that's why I've played cards all my life. I used to do that with my grandparents, and that's why I played cards an awful lot, because that was about your only recreation. You had to find something to do that didn't cost money.
So where did you live when you first got married?
Where did we live?
Uh-huh.
When we first got married, we lived in a little house on Power Street in Muncie, Indiana, that was on a corner, and it was a very small house, but it was in fairly good shape, but it didn't have a furnace in or anything. But it was fairly nice. We had a living room with a stove in it for heating, and then we had a bedroom, and then a kitchen and a bath, and a small room that was a storage room, and no garage, but of course we didn't have a car. But it was on the interurban line. The interurban line went on Power Street, so if there was any time that like Neff could catch the interurban car to go up to work, just...
When did he start getting pretty regular work?
Well, I'm not really sure about that. I'd say I'd say maybe a year or more, because after we lived at that house for a year, why, we borrowed $2,000 from my mother, and on an interest rate that was a good interest rate, so she would make some money because she needed money too, and on an interest rate, and bought a house. And so we made payments on the house, and we also paid her just like you would pay at a bank, so she would make some money too. And he had a pretty good run then, and we bought a bigger house, and so we had a living room and a bedroom and we had a reception hall and a bedroom and then a living room and a kitchen and downstairs, and it had an upstairs, and it had a bath and 2 bedrooms. And so we rented out the 2 bedrooms upstairs to make extra money. And what was supposed to be the dining room downstairs, we made into our bedroom that we slept in. And I worked before we got married, I worked at the gas company and had a real good job as a stenographer and a billing clerk. But their policy was that no married women could work there. So as soon as we got married, I lost my job. And at that time, jobs were hard to find, so the best I could do was to find a job to work in the evening for a doctor who was the health officer of Muncie. And I would work from 4 to 8, 6 days a week, and be his receptionist when he was in. He was only in like 2 nights a week, but then I had to be there every night because I had to take care of the books if anybody wanted a birth certificate or any records or anything, because he was a health officer. And I had to keep clean his office for him on the nights when there wasn't any, when I wasn't busy.
Why wouldn't they let married women work there? Did they think jobs were so scarce that once you were married?
That was just their policy. They just, I knew that, that was just their policy. When you hired on, you knew that if you got married, you lost your job. But it was a very good job, and I learned a lot there because I learned how to be a billing operator besides a stenographer, which later got me my job, which was good at Muncie newspapers. So it was really a learning job for me.
How much longer did you live in Muncie? I mean, yeah, Muncie, before you moved to Indiana?
Before we moved to,
I mean, moved, close to Indianapolis.
close to Indianapolis. Well, let's see. We were married in 1938, and you were born in 1946, and you were about 2 or 3 years old when we moved to Indianapolis, and we moved in the east side. We moved to the east side of town.
How long did you get to live in your new home before the war broke out and Dad left and stuff?
Not very long. I can't remember for sure. We had to sell it, of course, and let's see, we got married in 38. Neff went into service in 45. So in between that time, we had to sell our house, and then
Went in 45? So were you pregnant when he was gone?
no, no. He didn't go in 45. He went in 43. I'm
That's
sorry.
what I was thinking, yeah.
He went in at 43.
Right.
No, I was not pregnant. That was one of the reasons why he had to go. And he was the oldest, the last one chosen, the oldest man in his company. He was to go.
Mhm.
He was the oldest man there. And that was one reason why he had to go, was because we didn't have any children.
Mhm.
And by this time, Betty was at Ohio State University. And so we sold our house, paid back Mother the money that we had borrowed from her, and then Mother and I lived together and rented a large. We were very fortunate in getting a very nice, close downtown, within 4 blocks of right downtown, and it was a duplex, and it was brick, and it was very, very nice, and we lived upstairs, and it was quite large. We had a big front porch that went clear across the top, and we had a big living room, and then we had what should be a dining room, and we made that into a bedroom for Mother and I. Then we had a kitchen and a back porch, and then then there was a hall all the way. You came upstairs. When you came upstairs, every room was off of a hall. And so off of the one hall, we had 3 bedrooms and the bath at the end of the hall. So Mother and I rented out those 3 bedrooms, and then we used the dining room as a bedroom. And so we were able to make all of our expenses by the renting out of those. And of course, Mother was still working, and then that was when I got a job at Muncie newspapers as just in the office. But it turned out to be a very good job, because I was able to go from just working in the office to being an office manager, to being the payroll billing clerk, and then the CPA, who was head of the office, decided to go into business for himself, and so I was promoted to a still called office manager, but I kept all of the books and everything, and did everything except the taxes. He came back in to do the taxes. So while your dad was in the Army, I had a very good job, and was able to save quite a bit of money, which was, in that time, was quite a bit of money.
Mm-hmm.
And because Mother and I were we were making all of our expenses by living together.
When you had roomers, did they get kitchen privileges?
No. It was just roomers. That they were usually girls that worked at the telephone company, because we had very, very nice girls. Of course, they all had odd hours and everything. And if they wanted to use the kitchen, we'd let them, because because they all were very, very nice girls that we had, which was very good for us. And we were lucky in that way. And then let's see.
That must have been really scary, though, when Dad had to go to the war. I mean, I can't imagine going through that.
And especially because he went to, he was inducted at Fort Harrison in Indianapolis, and they got to stay there for quite a while before they shipped out. And so during that time, there was an opening at the railroad station, at the Railway Express, for someone to work in the office, and Ned volunteered because he'd had experience like that. And so he worked for, I think it was 9, so many, I can't remember. He worked so many weeks there. Anyway, it was enough time to go on his record that he was able to get railroad compensation for it when they decided to have when they decided to have
Pensions, retirement?
what do we call, what is it that we call that you get to, see, instead of getting, we get from railroad the pension, railroad, he gets railroad Medicare instead of just regular Medicare, because he worked enough hours that they considered him as not that it makes any difference really, because he doesn't get any more than he would otherwise, but that's why ours comes from there. It's because he volunteered for that, and then he was sent to Anniston, Alabama for his indoctrination into the Army, which was to last for 14 to 16 weeks, I forget which. And in that length of time, your dad had bad teeth, and in that length of time, they pulled all of his teeth out and sent him out on what they call a bivouac area, where you go in real bad weather. It's cold and raining and everything, and you have to crawl on your stomach underneath the barbed wires and everything. You have to have a rifle in your hand, and you're looking for the enemy. Mm-hmm. And they sent him out like that with no teeth, when he had just had his teeth pulled and everything. And so when I went down to see him the first time, he had lost about 30-some pounds, and he looked like an old man because he had no teeth, and they had worked him so hard, and of course he was not young. He was the oldest man in the regiment. So when he was in Anniston, Alabama, he had a really rough time. And then when they finished their basic training, they went right to New York, and or to New Jersey, because that was the embarkation place. And but they had to stay there for quite a little while. And I know your dad would call me and ask me to send him some money, borrowing some money, so that he could go into New York for the weekend to have something to do while they were waiting to go, because they didn't do anything, only just wait until time to go to be sent out to overseas. And then of course that was when he was sent to St. Lo, and went right to the front lines, because
Once he was sent, did you hear from him?
Not very often, because he was just because he
On
was
a boat.
Well, he was injured so quickly, because he went right to St. Lo beach in France, and that was where the thick of the fighting was. And he was a very good rifleman, and he was also a first scout. And so he was sent out ahead of them and to locate mine areas, and that was when he got hurt. So see, he was not there very long until he got hurt. So he spent most of his Army life in first one hospital and then another.
And that was overseas, or?
Overseas, in France.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't ever know, I didn't hear from him very
Hospitals
often.
in France?
Hospitals in France. I didn't know very much about where he was, didn't hear from him very often or anything.
Did he go from there back to Britain, or just from there back to the States?
I don't know. I think I can't remember. It was a very hard time.
Mm-hmm. I can't imagine.
I just can't remember.
And you
because-
probably just didn't have much information at all.
No.
You just knew he was hurt
Just
bad
know
and in
he
the
was
hospital.
hurt bad and didn't know where he was or how he was doing, just knew that he was in a hospital, and it was the explosion was so hard on his nerves and everything, but actually physically, the only thing it did was to blow off his finger. But it just went all through his whole body because of his, and went through all of his nerves. And so he had a very hard time there, and then they have so many people to take care of, they can't all pay attention to all of them all the time, and they didn't realize that his finger was not healing until they could smell the odor. And then when they took the bandage off, his finger just dropped off because it had got gangrene in it, and so he had quite a hard time, and that all went all through his body. So he had, in fact, when he came back from the service, he looked older than he did 15 years after that, and they said that he didn't come home in a wheelchair, but they said that that it would be very likely that he would probably be in a wheelchair within 5 to 10 years.
I wonder why they said that. I wish we had his medical records to find out why they said that.
I really don't know. I think it was because his whole body was just, what would you say? The nerves, that explosion had just gone through his whole body and just made him in such it made him such a nervous sort of person. Because he was so very nervous when he came home from the service and could not settle himself down to do anything at all. All he wanted to do was just to get out and be among people. He didn't want to stay at home or to go to work or anything. He just wanted to be out and among people and doing something that was a pleasure because he had been through so much. And that took him quite a little while to get over that. And then, but when he did, then he went back. In the meantime, of course, Indiana Railroad had sold out to Southeastern or Southwestern, whichever it is, trailways. And so instead of interurbans, they had buses. So when he went back to work, he went back to work as a bus driver. And in the meantime, Betty had met Mac, her husband, he was stationed, he was in the Army too. He was stationed in Columbus, Ohio, and they met there. And so then after she graduated from school, from Ohio State, where she got a job at Lazarus in Columbus, Ohio, and worked there for a year because that's how long he had before he would be able to get out of the Army. The war was over, but he had to serve for another year there. So then she got a job there, and they lived there until he was able to get out of the Army. And then, of course, he was from the Chicago district. So when he got out of the Army, they went back to the Chicago district. And he was able to go back to his job, which he had a job with
Worked with golf at one point.
That's it. He had a job with golf, and he went back to that job. And he had a cousin who worked for who did that he worked for?
Jewel T.
He had a cousin who worked for Jewel T, and so he asked him if there would be any positions open, and he said, well, for her to come in and apply to the accounting department because she had accounting and advertising. So she applied and got a job in the accounting department, and that was the way her job started. She started in the accounting department, and then just kept advancing and advancing because, as her term was, that she, of course, she was very, very smart and deserved everything she got. But her thing she always said was that she was always at the right place at the right time to get something better, which was very, very good. And In the meantime, Neff went back to work, and I was working at Muncie Newspapers. And so then Neff and I bought a house then at the edge of town. And we still didn't have a car, but there was a bus service there. So, of course, we would ride the bus to into town, and I went ahead and worked at Muncie Newspapers. And then while I was working there, that was when I got pregnant for you, Kathy, and then you were, and I worked until you were, as long as I could, until you were born. And then you were born in '46, and then we lived there for 2 years, and Neff worked for, drove the bus between, he had a regular run then, and he drove the bus between Indianapolis and Muncie and Fort Wayne. And but one thing I forgot to tell you that was very good, even before he had the regular run, he had a regular run with, and everybody liked him so well that they would, and they went through Anderson and went close to a bakery, and on this regular run that they would have, he would always stop at the bakery, and somebody would bring coffee, and then there were so many regular riders that they would have donuts and coffee on the bus practically every morning. It was just something that they all enjoyed doing, and it was very, very nice. He was so well liked, and was a very good operator. And then also he was always asked to be the one to take, at that time, high school seniors always took a trip to
New York or someplace
Washington,
like that.
D.C. or someplace like that, and they would always request that Neff would take them, which he did. And he was gone on a trip at the time when I was pregnant for you. And so of course he told everybody about it, and everything. And it was so strange because one of the girls that was on the trip, her sister was a nurse at Community Hospital where you were born. And so that was sort of a reunion when we found out that she knew all about you before you were ever born because she had talked to her sister about that and everything.
Where was I born though? Because was it Community too? Because Larry was born at Community.
Oh wait, no, I'm wrong about that. You were born at Ball State.
Right.
At Ball State Hospital.
That's right.
Not Ball State, Ball Hospital, Muncie,
Okay,
Indiana.
that's
That's right. Larry was born in because Community is in Indianapolis. No, you were born at Ball Hospital in Muncie, Indiana.
And you lived there for like 2 more years before you moved
I lived
to...
there for 2 years before we moved
And how come you moved? Did you work after I was born?
After you were born. See, we didn't move. Now, I've not said that right, Kathy, because we lived there longer than 2 years. We moved from the place that we lived after you were 2 years old and bought another house and moved to another house when you were 2 years old and lived at that house then. And your dad was still working for Indiana Railroad, except that now he was a safety director because they had asked him to take that as a position.
What pictures are those? I'm trying to remember. Those would have been when Chi-Chi was, or was that the first few
Chi-Chi
years?
was when you were when he was still working at when we were still living in our first house because there was pictures of you in your
Stroller and stuff.
stroller with Chi-Chi, and then but let's see. Then we bought. You were 2 years old, and no, we lived there when you were born. And that was the house that was the only house that we lived in Muncie before we moved away. And we didn't move away from Muncie until you were, no, we moved away from Muncie when you were 2 years old. That was right, because we moved to the east side of Indianapolis when you were 2 years old.
That's the place you call a chicken shack?
That's where we moved first, and so that wasn't East Indianapolis. That was at Oak Landon, and that was a chicken shack. Because this was a big farm that we moved to at Oak Landon. They had a garage and a chicken house that they had converted into homes. And so we lived in the one that was...
And how come you moved?
Because Neff was the safety director, and for some reason or other, that was the thing, they wanted him to be more centrally located, I guess, and we moved there. So, I'm not sure, that part I can't remember for sure about why we did move to Oak Landon from Muncie, but...
And Oak Landon's closer to Indianapolis?
Yes. It's like about 20 miles. And we lived there for I'd say, a year or more, because I can remember living there in the summer and having your playpen out in the yard where this was a beautiful big yard. And of course our chicken shack was just a living room with a stove, and then a bedroom that had a vault, a ceiling that went down, so that you almost had to bend down to when you were in part of it. And then we had a kitchen and a bathroom, and we had to go over to the main house to do our laundry. They let us use their. We had to buy a washer, but they let us put the washer in their basement, and then of course hang up their clothes either outside or in the basement. And then we lived there until we moved on into, found a house in the east part of Indianapolis and moved there, which was a very nice house. It wasn't it was a very nice house for us. You wouldn't consider it a nice house now, but it was a nice house for them. And it was in Irvington, and that was a nice location. And we had 2 bedrooms and a bath upstairs. And
Did Dad work in Indianapolis then?
He worked in Indianapolis then. And I guess that's why we moved there, because as safety director, he had to live in Indianapolis. That was the reason why we moved there. He had to live in Indianapolis as safety director. So when he lived at Oak Landon, he had to drive back and forth, and then we moved on in there. And then we were able to save enough money then that we could buy our other house that we had where we lived, when you can remember, when your dad fixed you that big play yard in the back where you had sand and all filled with sand and your swings and everything, and had a big backyard, and had a real nice house. The neighborhood was not too nice, but it was a very nice house. It was about the nicest house in the neighborhood. And then you were only 2 blocks from school when you started a school. And you went to school there at the school, I think it was 85. You went to school there until it just went through the 6th grade. And in the meantime, while we were living there, Neff had to, the Indiana Railroad went on strike, and he had to go to Michigan to drive the mail truck. And so he did that, and so he was gone most all the time, get to come home once in a while. And I guess that's how Larry became Larry, because Neff was gone for a while, and it was very hard for me to get pregnant anytime, because we had, I didn't get pregnant for you until after 7 years. And so that was a miracle, really, for me to have you. And then fact that Neff was gone for a while, then I guess that's how we got Larry, and that was another miracle then. And he was born in 54 then. And that was at the same time that a year before that, Neff's good friend, John Treves, had gone from Indiana Railroad to public service to work. And so he asked Neff to, he said, why don't you come out and apply for there was a job open as fire prevention assistant. And Neff says, but I don't know anything about that. He said, you don't need to, you can learn it. But he said, just come out and apply for it. And which he did and got the job, which was really wonderful. And
What did John Treves do at public service?
he was he worked in the accounting department. He was the chief accountant, I think. He had a pretty good job. And then, of course, Larry was born, and you were in school.
Did Dad was he looking anxious to like get out of working in Indianapolis? Or
No, not really. He didn't. But he did want to better himself, and when he went to apply for this job, he didn't, Indiana Railroad, the pay wasn't real good, but it wasn't real bad. But the main thing that was wrong with Trailways, I should say, it was Trailways then, was that they didn't have any benefits. You had no benefits for your family or anything. And when he went to public service to apply for the job, you had a lot of benefits for the family. And so that was the main reason why he changed jobs, because you had benefits for your family then, and he hadn't had before. And then, let's see, Larry was born, and we lived where we lived for a year in Muncie. I mean, in Indianapolis East Side, and of course public service is on the west side, so that meant that he had to drive through town and drive as far, like 20 miles on each side. So he had about 40 miles a day to drive. And but he did that because you just had one more year at your school. It just went through the 6th grade. Right. Then you were going to have to change to a different school anyway. And so we wanted you to go ahead and stay at that school because it was a good school. You were doing very well there, and it was very close. And so he drove back and forth for a year before we moved. But then that summer, then we looked for a house, and then we moved, of course, on 267.
When you had to leave Muncie, was that hard for you?
Yes, because Mother had always babysat all the time. We had never had anybody but her, and to babysit for you, and it was very hard, and it was very hard for me because she was by herself. It was very hard to leave, but you have to do what's best for your family.
What about when you moved? Did you want to move to Plainfield? To Avon?
We just started looking on the west side. We just started looking any place on the west side for a house, and we looked for several weeks. Every weekend we'd look for a house on the west side, and we just kept looking and looking for some place that was as close to Plainfield as we could get, so that Neff wouldn't have to, because he had driven for a whole year for so many. We wanted to move as close as we could, and we. So every week we just took the paper and we just went the whole weekend looking for a place to live. And we just happened we had an appointment to see a house that was 3 houses down the street from the one that we finally bought, that we had an appointment to go down to see it. But when we went by this house before we got to that, we did go to see the house that we had the appointment for, but there was also this other house that was brand new, that was didn't have anything, there wasn't anybody living there or anything, but it was brand new. But it was just about, so after we had went to look through the house that we had gone to see that someone lived in, well, then we went back and looked in the windows and everything to see if this was a brand new house. talked to the neighbors and found out that the owner just lived 2 houses from there. So we went down to see him and asked him if we could look at that house and how much it was and a few things like that. So he took us up and showed it to us and told us that it was going to be, in a week, it was going to be put on the market, and they were going to have open house. And it was going to be put on the market and be ready to sell. And so we looked at it and we liked it so well that we went ahead and bought it before it ever had, it never went on the market, because we bought it from him before he put it on the market.
So you felt pretty good about moving to the west side?
Oh,
and
yes.
Dad's job
Oh,
changed and
oh, yes,
everything?
because this was a beautiful house. Our own house that we had was very, very nice, and we had a huge big yard, but this had a huge yard too, and this was all brand new. So it was really a beautiful place, you know. Yeah, a beautiful place for Neff and I, because we never had been used to anything
That
like
kind
that.
of thing.
You know.
Yeah.
And it still is. It still is. The people have fixed it up now, and it's really nicer looking now than it was when we lived there, because they've reconstructed it some, and it has. Of course, it was stone, so naturally that held up very good, and it really is. You know, it really still is a very, very attractive house.
Well, I better go check the tape and find out if it's still running. It is, that's good. Okay.
When it was time for Kathy to be born, we didn't have a car, of course. And in the afternoon, my back started hurting, but not too bad. And then I went to bed about 9 o'clock in the evening, early, maybe 8, I'm not sure, because my back hurt. But it really wasn't too awful bad. But then when I got up to go to the bathroom, why, my water did break when I went to the bathroom, which was lucky that it happened like that. So we called the doctor, and he said, well, you better go to the hospital as soon as you can. So of course we didn't have a car, we had to call a cab. And so Neff called a cab, and we got ready, and I'd say this is like about 9 o'clock at night. And so we started getting ready to go, you know, and the cab didn't come, and it just took forever for it to get there. And so I think it was like about 10 o'clock before the cab got there, because we had to call back several times, you know. And so when we got in the cab to go, and we lived quite a ways from Ball Hospital, because we were on the opposite side of town. And so it was quite a ways to go. And he started to go another direction. And Neff said, where are you going? And he said, well, I have to pick up another person. Neff said, you don't have time to pick up another person. We have to get to the hospital. My wife is in labor, and we've got to get to the hospital. So he did take us to the hospital then. And you were born, when we got to the hospital and went in, why, they said, get her right to the delivery room. And so Neff stayed to give the information, and they took me right to the prep room and the delivery room, because you were born just a few minutes after midnight. So we just barely got to the hospital in time for you to be born. And so
That's really unusual with a first pregnancy.
and besides, I was 30 years old. You know, I was not a young person, and it was so fast. And then the bad part was, see, that I was so afraid when 11 years later, when Larry was born, I was so afraid that the same thing was going to happen, that I started having the back pains. And so we went to the hospital like at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then Larry wasn't born until 5 o'clock in the evening, and he was born in April. And I can remember laying there in bed, and this was a bad April. I can remember seeing the ice. It was an ice storm, ice forming on the trees, and the branches bending down, you know, and everything. And so I was there for 12 hours, because they would give me something, and then they would let me lay for a little while. But it took a long time for Larry to be born. And of course, I don't know whether that had anything to do with the fact that I was 40 by that time, but then I had walked an awful lot, because before Larry was born, I had been the assessor, which they don't have nowadays, but you go around to people's house. That's when you have household, that was when you had household assessment. Your household furniture was assessed, and your car and things. So you would go around and you would leave this form for people to fill out, or you would go in and fill it out if they were at home, but most people wanted you to leave it and come back and pick it up, because they wanted to have time to put it down themselves. So I had this whole precinct, and I don't know how big it was, but a precinct is pretty good size. And because it takes about a month and a half to do it. And this was in March, and so I did this in March when Larry was to be born in April. And so I was huge to be walking, but it was good for me, because I walked every day to deliver these, and then I would have to go and pick them up. And I didn't quite get it finished, didn't quite get them all picked up by the time he was born, but I'm sure that was helpful for me. And then that too made me think that this pregnancy would probably be like my first one, which it wasn't, which I had plenty of time, because we got there at 5 in the morning. He wasn't born until 5 in the evening. And it was much more difficult. But the fact too was that, of course, you were not a small baby. As I remember, I think you weighed 7 pounds and 8 ounces or something like that. So you were not a small baby. But then Larry weighed 8 pounds and 9 ounces, and that was pretty good size for me at 2, besides being sort of a hard pregnancy, because I had to have some work done after he was born.
And how did you, I know how you decided, how did you decide on my name?
We had 2
I
names.
know I got the postcard that was supposed to be, I was supposed to be Larry Wayne.
Yeah, well,
When he was in New York, Dad sent the
well, you
postcard.
see, of course, I think men always think that their first child is going to be a boy. And that time then, you didn't ever find out ahead of time. They always think their first child is going to be a boy. But I had 2 girls' names picked out, and one was Kathy Lynn, and the other was Jamie Lee. And so Neff liked Kathy Lynn better than he did Jamie Lee. So and he had seen, years before, when he was a young man, he had seen a newspaper story that Lou Ayres was in, and his name was Larry Wayne. However, Wayne was his last name, but he liked that name, and he always said that's what his son's name was going to be.
So that's the only name you had for a boy?
So we only had Larry Wayne for a boy. That was the only name, it was that. But I had picked out Kathy Lynn and Jamie Lee. Those were my 2 favorites.
What if Larry had been a girl? Did you have a name picked out?
That's what I mean.
Oh, no, I meant when Larry was born.
Oh, when Larry was born.
Or did you know he was a boy?
No, we didn't know, and we didn't know he was a boy, and I can't remember that we had a name picked out, except I think it might have been Jamie Lee, because I always had liked that too. I don't remember too much about that part of it. We just knew that it was going to be Larry Wayne if it was a boy, but we didn't know that it was a boy, except that I was bigger, so we kind of felt like maybe everyone seemed to think it was going to be a boy, the way I looked and that I was bigger. And so I guess we just sort of went with that. But I'm sure that had he been a girl, it would have been Jamie Lee, because for some reason or other, those were the only 2 names that I ever had wanted. And I don't remember why. I don't remember where I saw those names or anything, but those were the 2 names that I wanted.
That's pretty cool.
And as I say, it was a miracle for both of them, because I had such a hard time getting pregnant the first time, hard time the second time.
Did your mother?
No. See,
but Betty did, obviously.
See, Mother was she was married just 10 months when I was born. Of course, she was just 18. Or 17, whichever she was. She had graduated. She got married as soon as she graduated from high school, but I sort of think it was 18, and I think I was born then when she was 9. See, her birthday is in April. I was born in February before I was born in February before she was 19 probably in April. In 36. Which would have been 2 years before we got married. I think that's about right. I think he came to Indianapolis in 1936. Do I go ahead now?
Yeah, well, no, you can go ahead anytime. But you were talking about when you first saw him.
Yeah, Well, that was, as I say, when Neff came to Indianapolis from Bluffton to work in 1936, he was a very handsome young man. He had black, real nice curly hair. It wasn't, it was wavy and it was not bushy or anything. It just laid very, very nice. And he was tall and slim and very, very attractive. And I noticed that right away, and thought that he was a very attractive person. And so then, we got to talking. Each evening we would talk and talk about our prospective jobs whenever he'd have. But of course he would be working at the time, but we would have a little bit of time to do that, and everything.
In between. On and off.
Yeah, on and off. And then we started in going together, and as I say, we didn't have much time together because he was working nights, and so I got in like about 4 o'clock, and I think maybe I got in about 4:30, and he didn't go to work until 6 or 6:30. So I would walk down to his room and meet, and he would be up and be almost ready to leave, and that way then we could walk back and talk and visit on the way back to his, and we would be going back to Indiana Railroad for him to work. And I don't think we had had very many dates when out of a clear blue sky one evening, and we hadn't even talked about loving each other or liking each other or anything, but out of a clear blue sky, he just said to me, "You're the woman I'm going to marry." And it was quite a surprise because we hadn't even talked about, and it did turn out that way, of course, but we really...
Well, did you feel that way too?
I really didn't know him that well. He just he just had decided that I was the woman he was going to marry, which was very flattering, of course. And because, as I say, I thought he was really, he was.
Were you in love with him at that point?
I don't think so, because we hadn't gotten that far. I was really surprised at him saying that, and I don't really think that he really actually loved me yet. I think he just had decided that I was the type of person that he wanted to marry.
When did you fall in love with him?
Shortly after that, because we got very close in just such a short time, because we had such a short time together. Because he worked so many hours and I worked so many hours, and we had and then I can't remember for sure how long it was before he decided to go. I guess he did. I guess we had parts of 2 years together there. When we would have maybe weekends and everything, but we didn't have any money to do anything with, so we never went anyplace. There was never anything much that we did, only just walk around and go to the park but we didn't really have any money to do anything with, either one of us, because he wasn't making too big of wages, and he had to pay his own room and board. And of course, I had to help at home a lot. I gave Mother all the money that I made. It took that for us to live, and so I didn't have any money either. So it was a really, it was really a romance in a roundabout way, because we didn't weren't able to shower gifts on anybody.
Well, yeah, but I don't know how many
Or anything like that.
romances are really that way in real life.
You know, so it was really sort of a strange courtship, because we just started in going with each other, and I hadn't gone with anybody hardly before that either, because I had been living out I had gone with a fellow when I lived in the country with my grandparents, and because he had brought me over to see Mother when she was ill. But then when I moved to Muncie, well then of course he went to Purdue to school, and so then of course I didn't see him anymore. And
Did Dad ask you to marry him? Did he ask you, or did you both just decide at some point to get married, or do you remember?
well, the only thing I remember is that he gave me a ring one night, and of course asked me then if I would marry him. But of course we both knew that it was in the future, because I was still helping out at home, and we didn't have any money to get married on. We couldn't have afforded any place to live, and there was we couldn't live with my mother because she had rooms rented out, and Betty was there, and I was sleeping on the Davenport, and we didn't have any extra room, so we didn't have any.
But it was like an engagement ring.
An engagement ring. And which was, I imagine, for about a year probably. I can't remember for sure, but I imagine about a year.
Where did he get the ring? Was it like a cigar band, or did he go buy it someplace?
No, it's one of the rings it's the ring that I still have.
So he went and bought that.
He went and bought it, yes, and made payments on it.
Yeah.
And he was making payments on this ring for a long, long time. Because it's a nice ring. It's
ring.
a very nice ring.
Yeah.
Yes, he made payments on it for a long time.
Before he even asked you?
Now, I don't know about that. I don't know when he bought it, and how he did that. I can't remember that part. Because it was a surprise. He just gave it to me as a surprise. I didn't know that I didn't go with him to pick it out, or I didn't know he was getting me a ring. And
had you met his family?
yes, because we could ride up to. I hadn't met all of his family, but you see, we had passes to ride on the railroad, so we could ride to Bluffton. And his brother was married and lived in Bluffton, so we went up quite a few weekends and spent the weekend.
Is this Garnet?
That's Garnet. And spent the weekend with Paul and Garnet. And because they lived in Bluffton. His folks lived in Warsaw at the time, and I hadn't met them for a long, and Dixie lived with them, and I had met them, and Dorothy was married, and was married to Joe, and she lived in Bluffton. But of course, Paul and Neff were near the same age, and because now Dorothy was not much older than Neff, but then Joe was quite a bit older than Dorothy. And,
Oh, I don't think I knew that. I don't think I realized that.
And but Dorothy was only a year older than Neff, and then Neff was only about a year and a half older than Paul. So we spent a lot of time with Paul and Garnet, his brother and his wife, and they were struggling too, because they lived in a little house that was next to a grocery store, and he worked for the man who owned the grocery store. So they were struggling too.
So he started driving truck after that?
Oh yes, quite a bit after that, because I can't remember. And I think Garnet started working at a factory then, I believe. I'm not real sure about that. That's sort of vague in my mind. And yes, you see, because they had both children when he got killed.
Right. So he started driving
Truck.
when she got pregnant, or?
He started driving. See, he was killed in 43, the same year that his dad died. He was killed in 43.
Oh.
And so, see, they didn't have very long together. And
Dad's dad died in 43 too?
uh-huh.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize he lived that long.
Oh, yeah, he was working, he had a victory garden. And he was working in his victory garden. He smoked quite a bit. And he was working in his victory garden, and he was smoking a cigarette, and he had a sharp pain, I guess, or anyway, he just got tired for a minute, and he sort of leaned on his shovel while he was working in his victory garden, and then he just toppled over and he died from a heart attack. Was that quick? Yes, and that was in 43. That was
And then Paul died that same year. Oh, I didn't realize that was the same year.
That was he died in June of 43, and Paul died in September of 43. And Neff went into the service in 43.
Wow.
So it was,
43 was not a good year.
no, 3 was a bad year.
Yeah, 43 was not a good year. Don't know what year that is. Or the year of the, like in Chinese New Year's or something like that. What that year is.
But I didn't meet his family until quite a while later, because they ran a tavern in Warsaw, Indiana, and had eats plus drinks, and they lived there.
So you met his mom after his dad had died?
Oh, no.
No, but it's just after you had gotten engaged.
No, because they moved back to Bluffton from Warsaw then. And when he died, they lived in Bluffton. And they lived they lived right next to the railroad track. And we went up to see them different times. And one night when we stayed up there with them overnight, we slept in a bedroom that was upstairs, and it's very close to the railroad track. And of course, I guess after you live by a railroad track, you get used to things like that. But of course, we weren't. And so, in the middle of the night, a train went by, and Neff and I both sat straight up in bed. It scared us to death. We thought that somebody was running into the house. But they lived in Bluffton when he died. They had moved back. They had sold their tavern and had moved back.
That's interesting. They went from a farm to a tavern where they were serving stuff. And
Well, see, he really didn't go to from a farm. He was a conductor on the.
Oh, that's right.
He was
But didn't she come from a farm family?
She came from a farm family.
Because I remember seeing pictures of her that way.
She came from a farm family. She lived in outside of Marion, and he worked on I forget what they called that, but it was the Wabash and Marion and the northern part of Indiana Railroad. Worked as a conductor.
Did you see Betty and Mac much after you were married?
After we were married, oh yes, quite a bit, because we would go up there, and they had, of course, it was lean years for them too in the very beginning, because they even lived out on a lake, like Wakanda Lake, I think was the name of it, in Chicago, and they lived out there in a little lean-to, practically, like a beach house, because it was very poorly constructed and everything, and their table was just in the kitchen was just a made table that was like a board that you would pull up from the wall and then put 2 sticks down, and they lived there for quite a little while, and then then they had a chance to go to another town close by to live with a man who lived alone, and he wanted somebody to help him with his work and everything. and also to be there because he was not too well. So Betty and Mac went to live with him, which was in a fairly nice house. But then, of course, she had to do the work besides working, and of course, Mac had to do the work outside. And they lived there with him for a while too, before they finally bought a house in Libertyville, Illinois.
I remember the Libertyville place.
That was their first house that they bought.
Did you guys ever talk about the fact that it took you so long to get pregnant and that she wasn't?
I don't think we did. We wondered about it because of the fact that our mother she got pregnant right away, within a year. And, but then of course there was 6 years difference between us. But they prevented that. They didn't want any more children because they lived on the farm, and Mother had so much work to do on the farm because my dad worked in town at a sales car place, and he didn't do any farm work at all. And Mother had hands to feed, and worked and had a big garden, and worked and milked cows, and drove a school bus, and and when I was in school, then she took Betty with her in a bassinet when she would drive the school bus.
But did you and Betty ever talk about the fact that it seemed
No,
to
we
take
never.
longer for you
No, I don't
guys
think
to
we
get
ever
pregnant?
really. I don't think we ever really talked about it or ever realized that it was.
Or maybe that was too uncomfortable since Betty wasn't. I mean, it took you 7
Well-
years, but I mean, she still wasn't.
And she, I'm not sure.
Did she
that-
want them from the beginning?
I'm not sure that she did, because she was very busy with her career, and she was advancing so rapidly that I don't think she really wanted to have any children at the beginning. And then, of course, she did later. But, and then it was very hard for her too then. And, but I don't think she did at the beginning. I think she tried to prevent it, and then because she was working so hard on her career and was advancing so rapidly. But then when she wanted to, then it was very hard for her. And I don't know, it was very strange because it was, Mother's family and my dad's family both had, Mother had a brother and a sister, and my dad had a sister and 4 brothers. So the genes were there that, and then they had, my folks then had Betty and I too, and they probably could have had more. I mean, it wasn't that they couldn't. So I don't know what it was. It was very strange that it happened to both of us that way, and I don't know why.
That's interesting. Yeah. I know Callie thinks about that from time to time. I mean, I always knew, and I think it was probably just because of fatalism, but I always knew that the minute that I decided I was going to become pregnant, I would become pregnant immediately. And I did.
And you did.
Yeah. I mean, I always knew that I would somehow be.
I think I believe that maybe that was the way it was with Ginger and Larry too, I think.
Yeah. I think it was fatalism with me. I was so scared that I would become pregnant. I knew that I was probably going to, if anything happened in my life, I would become pregnant. And so when I decided to have Callie, I had her like that, and all the doctors said, impossible.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Can't be pregnant. In fact, one doctor was even trying to have me do some stuff because he says, well, you couldn't possibly be pregnant. And I said, no, I am. So I'll go to a different doctor now and stuff. So that was pretty interesting. But I know Callie thinks about that every once in a while, wondering, what it'll be like, for her and stuff.
And did you never not want to have any more, or just not have?
Yeah, no, I was really happy with one child.
So it wasn't that you couldn't have had more?
I'm sure I could have. No, I really did sort of decide that I really, really wanted Callie. She was very planned. You know, that was very planned, and I went to her badly. But I think it was probably also planned. I mean, there might have been some time down the road, but then that changed. But no, I think I was always sort of, I've always been sort of a one-on-one person. And I don't think that was conscious necessarily at that point in time, but for me, I sort of decided for me and the kind of person I am, it was hard for me to have a relationship, a child, and a job. That those were three different things, and I could do those three things. But for me, being the kind of person I am, it was hard to do more than that.
Well, now, see, I wanted to become pregnant just as soon as I could, but that was because I went to several doctors to see what was wrong, see if there was anything wrong, and so did Neff, and there was nothing wrong with either one of us. There was no reason why we couldn't have children, but of course that far back, you know, they didn't go ahead and do anything about it. Now they just kept saying, well, you will eventually, because there's no reason why you can't. But it was very hard for me to get pregnant both times, because I never did do anything to keep from getting pregnant. So it was very hard for me to get pregnant, even though the doctors, because see, I worked for a health officer right at the very beginning, and I talked to him practically every week about it, and he examined me and everything, and he didn't understand why I didn't get pregnant. But it just wasn't in the cards, I guess.
Well, I hope Callie can do that when she wants to. I know she wants to have kids. So I hope that will be as easy for her as it was for me.
Yes,
as easy for her to make choices about it.
I hope when the time comes that she wants to, that she doesn't have, that she doesn't have any problem. Because I did.
And Betty certainly did.
And Betty certainly did. And yet there wasn't anything beforehand that would make you think that was going to be possible.
Yeah. And I I always felt like that would not be my problem. I don't know why, but I just always felt like it wouldn't. So. Who knows? Did you get along with Dad's family?
Oh, yes, very well, very well. Everybody was very, very congenial and very good. Yes, along very well with all of his family. And especially with the kids. What I mean is, I was very close to Dorothy. When she got sick, it was just as hard for me as it was for Matt, because we went up there just about every weekend when she had cancer, and it was just as hard. And of course, Joe had a cottage out at the lake, and we went up there a lot before she got sick, and went out there fishing, and went out there on the weekends. And by that time, Paul and Garnet had moved to Warsaw, so they weren't. Or maybe
Paul was dead long before that.
Paul had died by that time, and Garnet had.
Because I remember when Garnet was sick.
And Garnet.
So I was here by then. I mean, I remember when, Dorothy was sick.
Yes, you were in high school, weren't you? I think it was your next to last year, or you were in high school.
Well, I remember I was in college when Lashy died.
Yes.
Now, I'm trying to remember exactly when Dorothy died. If she died.
She died before.
I think before, when I was first. Well, I was only there 2 years. See, I can't remember if she died when I was in high school or in college.
I'm sure it was in high school.
I'm sure it was too, because I remember the huge fight Dad and she had.
I'm sure it was in high school.
And that was before she was sick. And we lived in Plainfield by that time. So I would have had to been in 8th grade. So
I can't remember.
sometime in there before I went to high school.
I can't remember what year she died. But she was sick for 2 years, at least 2 years before she died. And that was a horrible death.
That was really hard.
But now she was the only one in his family that had cancer. And then, of course, Betty, the only one in our family that had cancer.
No, outside of that, there's fairly longevity in our families.
Outside of Neff's dad, he was only 55, I think, when he died. He died very young. But then his mother lived to be 89. And mother was 91, so they both lived a long time. And I think my dad was like 70-something when he died.
What did he die of? Do you know?
He had a heart attack.
That's what I thought.
Because he was heavy and he smoked a lot. Ran around, drank a lot. That was, You were, I don't know what year it was, but you were just a baby. No, Larry was just a baby when he died. Because
I sort of remember that.
Because Mother came and stayed with you kids because his mother insisted that Betty and I come to the funeral. And so there was money provided for Betty to come from school, or to come from, she
went to school, yeah.
She must have come from Chicago, because there was money provided for her to come on the train, and she came on the train, and we met her, and she and I went to the funeral. And
Did they have other kids? Your father and Mary Helen?
No. And Betty and I did not sit in with the family at the funeral. We sat out like the visitors did, which was not exactly what they would have liked, but I could not do it any other way. And of course, Betty went along with whatever. It's fun. And he is buried in a mausoleum in Portland, Indiana. He is buried above the ground in a huge mausoleum. As I remember, I think it's just one just for him.
Where's Portland?
In Jay County, which
So
is
that's close to Muncie.
well, it's about well, no, it would be from here. Muncie would be just about halfway between here and Portland.
Oh, okay. Where's Red Key?
Red Key is very close to the power station, or where, and it would be on the way to Portland too, say about halfway.
Yeah, you can leave anytime you want.
Oh, why not?
Well, I was going to ask you about some other stuff too. Anyway.
Because I can remember him talking about that they lived in the country and they could, evidently they lived out where I don't know where they lived, but they lived out close to Landisville. They might have lived where her folks lived at first. But I don't think so. I think Aunt Donnie always lived there. But they must have lived on a farm close there. Because Neff had to work in the fields a lot. But I can remember him talking about they could only afford one bicycle, and see there was three of them then, Dorothy and Paul and Neff. Mm-hmm. And it was a girl's bicycle, and that was all. And they could get that cheap, and they could only afford that. And so they all had to ride that. And then and Dorothy was she was musically, and of course they all are musically inclined. That is, I mean, both the girls are. Dixie plays by ear, while Dorothy plays by notes. Mm-hmm. But Dorothy took lessons, and the only way that she could take lessons was that both of the boys had to mow yards and earn money and then they give her the money to take piano lessons. And then they had some little chickens, and their dad was like in the field one day, and Paul and Neff were just a year apart, and they was playing, and they stepped on one of the little chickens, and it was practically dead. And I remember Neff saying because Neff's dad was very strict and very pretty mean. Mm-hmm. And so Neff got a needle and thread, and he sewed up the chicken, sewed the insides back in, and sewed the chicken up so that it would look like it hadn't died. Mm-hmm. So his dad wouldn't know it. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. But I don't remember just exactly how all that happened. Mm-hmm. But I remember him talking about he and Paul had, sewing up the chicken so that their dad wouldn't know it. And for a while, because they knew they would get a licking. Mm-hmm. And get a hard licking, probably with a strap, because that's what he used. And then I remember him telling about he and Paul mowing, when they weren't very old, mowing yards for other people to pay for Dorothy's piano lessons. That was the only way she could take.
What are some of your happiest memories of you and Dad? Things that every once in a while that come to mind? Can you think of anything? That may be an unfair question because, how do you take that many years?
That many years together.
Yeah. But do you have any things you think about every once in a while that?
No, not really. I thoroughly enjoyed our trips that we took to when we went to Washington D.C. and the train, and we had the parlor car. Mm-hmm. That was one of the most wonderful things we did. Mm-hmm. Because you could sit there in the parlor car and look out, and then when we got to Washington D.C., while Neff was working, while you and I went to all of the different places that are famous, And then I also, when Larry was little, Mother came, and you were, of course, in school, and Larry was little, and Mother and Frank came and stayed with you because Neff had to go to, I believe it was New Jersey, because we went to the boardwalk.
That wasn't with Frank. That was just your grandma and me. That was just your mother and me. Because that's when Larry locked himself in the...
Frank was there.
Well, Frank must have been semi-dead because he didn't do anything.
Because he opened the window. He opened the window to get in.
Well, that's interesting. See, I don't remember that. I think that we did. But, yeah, he could have been there. Except, see, I think he was gone when I was younger.
I was thinking that Frank was there, and he was the one that pried the window open in the garage.
I just don't remember him
To
being
get
there
in.
during that time. Maybe he was just sort of in a back room or something. I don't remember him being there at all.
But that was a nice trip until we got home and found out that they were in there.
Well, yeah, but that was okay. He was fine. Nothing bad had happened.
Yeah, but to have a little boy like that up on top of the car and not be able to
Well,
get
no, that
in
was
there.
scary, but
But that was a nice trip that we took
Mhm.
because it was in New Jersey at the boardwalk, and that was a nice trip. And then, of course, all of the cruises that we took were very enjoyable. All, I have pictures of all. And the trip that Betty and Mother and Mindy and I took. However, Mother was ill
Mhm.
and had the heart attack, but then we went ahead and went to, Mindy and I went to a lot of the things anyway, and did a lot of the things, even though she was not well and had to stay in the hotel. And it was a miracle that she lived through that, really. Because the minute that we got back to the airport in Muncie, why, I called the doctor and he said, we'll get her to the hospital right away. So we went right from the airport to the hospital. And she had had the heart attack before that, because when they checked her for a heart attack, it was an old one. So she had it while we were gone. But that was an enjoyable trip that I took. And then, of course, another memorable trip that I took was with Betty, that when I went to New York with Betty, when Betty took me to New York, and we got to stay at this really, I can't remember the name of the hotel, but it was a very, very nice hotel, and we ate at, what is that, something on the Green.
oh yeah.
It's a very famous restaurant.
Yeah, I know exactly what it is.
And we stayed there for 2 or 3 days. And I took, she was working, and I took a couple of side trips on the bus. Went down to Chinatown, and I believe I went to the Statue of Liberty. I did 2 things. I can't remember for sure what the other one was. And then, of course, we came on up to see you. And that was, that was nice. That was,
Yeah, I remember my trip with Betty to New York too, when I graduated.
when you graduated.
That's pretty interesting.
And of course, Neb and I we went to Hawaii with Frank and Martha, and that was wonderful. We had a wonderful time then. The weather was gorgeous. The hotel was beautiful. It was just, and we rented a car and drove all over the island, and saw everything there was to see. So that probably was the nicest trip we ever took. And that was our gift to each other when he retired. And then after that, of course, we took 2 or 3 other cruises with Frank and Martha, and with another couple that lived across from Martha, and I can't remember their name now. He has died, but I can't remember their name. But they were really fun. We had a big good time with them. It was the 6 of us, and we really enjoyed that. And so we had a lot. We took a lot of. I suppose we must have taken 5 or 6 cruises.
Yeah, I'd forgotten it was that many.
It might not be that many, but
Did you like going up to Wisconsin and Michigan to go fishing or not?
not too well. That was not my, not that, I'm not a fisherman. That was not my bag. But then I did it because I enjoyed it. And then too, of course, we met the Talmadges, and that was very, very nice because we formed a lasting friendship with them. And they had Carolyn, who was your age, and then, of course, she was pregnant for Margaret at the same time I was pregnant for Larry. And that was fun to be with them. And then there was another couple that we met up there that Nev went to, that he was in the Army with, that later on we met them one time when the Talmadges weren't there, and had a real nice week up there. It was a very nice place. It isn't that I didn't have a good time, because I did, but I'm just not a fisherman. I just don't like to fish as well as the rest of them did. But as far as having a good time, why, you always have a good time, because you always do something in the evenings, and if it was raining or anything, well, we'd go to towns and go to something go through some of the places that there were to go to, and things like that. So it was fun. And then, of course, when we went to Wisconsin with later, just maybe our last trip with we went to Wisconsin with Jerry and Sharon Friedman and Betty and Leno Moraldo. And there's such a difference in all of our ages, see, because Jerry and Nancy are so young, then Betty and Leno are in the middle, and then we're old. But we all had such a good time together. And the fishing was terrible. We didn't catch any fish, but
Where'd you go that time?
Someplace in Wisconsin, and I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was a place
Someplace different than you'd never
than
been.
we'd ever have been, because it was recommended by Benninghouses, who lived next door to us, because that's where they went several times. And the reason why they went there is because there was a restaurant there that had home cooking, and it was right there at the place. And they did have wonderful meals, and very reasonable, and we ate there all the time. And then we would, except if we caught fish, and of course we only had one. We were only able to have one fish fry, because we kept saving them, and it was just barely enough to have one fish fry. Of course, we always ate breakfast at home, and we take turns of fixing breakfast. I mean, at the cabin, we take turns of fixing breakfast. Have pancakes or so on.
How did you all decide to go?
Well, let's see, how was it? I think that was when the fellows were going down to, that was when they were having their coffee breaks. And that they were all...
What year was that? Do you have any idea? Dad had retired at that point.
Yes. Because he didn't start going down there until he retired. And of course, Leno had been retired for quite a while before that, because he retired when he was 35 years old, because he was ill. I mean, it was a disability. And then, of course, Jerry, they had they were the dentists there, right there by that restaurant, and so they'd always go there every morning too. So it just started out as like a coffee break, and then they just kept going. Meet there at 6. It opened at 6, and everybody'd meet there at 6 o'clock. And then they got to talking about, they all liked to fish. Leno and Jerry both loved to fish, and Nev, of course, loved to fish. So they got to talking about fishing, and just decided to go. And we went to, I think we went 3 different times, but the time that was the most fun was the last time when we went to Wisconsin, even though we didn't catch any fish. But it was a wonderful place to eat, and very reasonable. And then we played cards every night, and we all liked to play. Sharon was the only one who didn't know how to play, and she learned how to play while we were there. And she won an awful lot of the time, because we played poker a lot, and we played some other game that I can't remember what it was, but it was fun. And then we would, the fellows were having such bad luck fishing that we, the women, had taken books with us, and we decided not to even go. So we just sit out. It was such a nice yard, and every place is so nice to sit and be outside. So we just spend the afternoon reading and trade books back and forth, and so it was just real nice. We just all got along real well together, even though there was such a difference in all of our ages. It's really strange that there would be 3 couples that would get along so well together, that were so much different in age. Like, gee, I can't venture to say now, but it would be, see, if you think about it, it kind of seems like it might be like 20, 40, 60, something like that. I'm not sure. That isn't quite right. That couldn't be, because Jerry and Sharon couldn't have been 20, because he'd been through dental school and had a dentistry, so that couldn't be right. But anyway, they were, let's say 30-some, and 40 to 50, and then Jeff and I were, of course, 65, over 65. So there was quite a difference in ages, but we did have a good time. We all, we've talked about that so many times since Betty's been gone, and since Jerry's been sick, and since F's been sick. You know, how many good times we had together, and what a funny combination it was of people.
That's really interesting. If you could go back to any time, would you go back to a certain time?
Well, I don't know, honey. I don't hardly know. I can remember how happy I was when I got pregnant both times, because it was, to me, a miracle. Because it took so long both times, that I really was very, very happy all of the time. And, because I really just felt like it was a miracle, especially after you were both born all right. And at that time, you see, they said if you had a child as late as I had Larry, there was a chance that there would be something wrong. And I used to, that's not on it.
Yeah, but, yeah, it's on.
Oh, it is. But I just, I just remembered. Actually, that probably would be the happiest time of my life, both of those times, because I just felt like God had created a miracle for me. And the fact that He made it so that we could have. The part that was so nice about it was, even though there's 11 years difference, it made it so that we could have two families, and we could concentrate completely on each child separately, which we did, and we did almost the same thing twice, because when you were in school, why, you were in a lot of things, and you were in band, and you did a lot of things, and we went to everything that you were in. And then when Larry went to school, he was in sports, so that was still part of band. So we were always in all of the organizations, and just went through the same thing again. And that's probably what kept us in as good a health and as young as it did, because we kept up with the children, and did the same thing twice. So that's probably, that probably would stand out in my mind more than anything else, would be the fact that of the way of being able to have children, and the fact that we were able to do the same thing. We didn't concentrate. We didn't have any difficulty in knowing what we were going to do, whether we were going to do something with one child or whether we were going to do something with the other child.
Yeah, they were separate. Yeah. Would you change anything?
I don't believe so, because really to start out as poor as we did remarkably well. And I don't believe I'd change anything, because we learned a lot from not having anything, and learned how to save, and learned how to make good use of our money. And I don't believe I'd change anything. If there was anything to change, I don't believe I would, because you don't live that many years without having lots of good memories.
What do you think, I don't know if this is still on or not, so it doesn't matter, but what do you think made you and Dad the strongest?
In what way?
Oh, just your ability to love each other and be together and stuff.
Gee, I don't know. We always got along very well with all of our working. He never objected to me working away from home, and he helped as much as at home as he helped with a lot of things, and we would just divide up all of our work together, and we just, I don't know really of any one particular thing. We just were able to weather any storm that come along, and and we didn't ever have any money problems. What I mean is, we never argued about money. If I was the more saving person, but then I never kept him from getting something that he wanted to get, and we just both had grown up. We both had grown up the same way, and so naturally we appreciated everything we had. It had been